Have you ever rushed into your baby's room, heart pounding, imagining the worst, only to get there and find them completely fine? Even worse, with a big smile on their face, as if nothing had happened. That moment is unsettling in a very particular way, because on one hand, you feel an immense sense of relief. On the other, a small voice inside you whispers, "Wait, was I just tricked by someone who still wears diapers?" If you've ever experienced this, you can take a deep breath, because what I'm about to tell you will completely change the way you see this behavior. And the next time it happens, instead of frustration, you might feel something you didn't expect. Admiration. Let's start from the beginning. When a baby is born, they enter the world with no communication tools except crying. There are no words, no coordinated gestures, no way to point to what they want. Crying is everything. It is the one and only language they have to say they're hungry, in pain, scared, cold, or alone. It's through crying that they literally survive, because crying is what brings an adult to them to care for them. This is evolutionary. It's part of our oldest programming as a species. Babies who cried loudly and effectively had a higher chance of being attended to, fed, and protected. Crying is not a weakness, it's a survival strategy that has been refined over thousands of years of human evolution. But then, at some point between 6 and 9 months of age, something extraordinary begins to happen inside your baby's brain. Neural connections that didn't exist before begin to form. Different regions of the brain start communicating with each other in new and more complex ways. And the baby begins to do something that, until that moment, was impossible for them. They begin to think intentionally about what they're doing. That's when what we call fake crying starts to appear. And I need you to understand one thing before we continue. This cry isn't fake in a negative sense. It's not an attempt to deceive anyone. It's not manipulation. It's not malice. It is, in fact, one of the most beautiful and clearest signs that your child's cognitive development is going very, very well. Think about it. For a baby to be able to pretend to cry, they need to have developed a set of mental abilities that are quite sophisticated for someone so small. They need to have associative memory. That is, they need to remember that when they cry, you come. They need to have the ability to anticipate consequences. That is, they need to understand that if they make a certain sound, a certain thing will happen. And they need to have intentionality, which is the ability to do something with a clear purpose in mind. These three things together, memory, anticipation, and intention, are markers of intelligence. They are exactly the kind of cognitive processing that researchers in infant neuroscience observe with excitement when they emerge, because they indicate that the brain is organizing itself in a healthy and advanced way. So when your baby lets out that short cry, pauses, and waits to see if you'll come, and then either repeats the sound or stops completely when they notice your presence, they are essentially doing science. He is testing a hypothesis. He's saying, with the only tools he has available, if I do this, that happens. Let me see if it works again. This is causal thinking, and it's beautiful. Now, let's go a little deeper into this world, because there are different types of this behavior, and each of them tells a different story about what's happening inside your little one's mind. The first type is what I like to call a presence check cry. It's that short sound, almost like a test, followed by a long, silent pause. During this pause, the baby is listening. They're waiting for the sound of your footsteps, the creak of the floor, your voice in the distance. They're not necessarily in pain or hungry. They're checking if you're available, whether the bond is still active, whether their safe harbor is still there. This behavior has very deep roots in attachment theory, which is one of the most important frameworks in developmental psychology. Babies who feel secure in their bonds with their caregivers grow up with a more stable emotional foundation. They explore the world with more confidence because they know they have somewhere to return to when they feel unsafe. And one of the ways they have to check if that safety is still there is exactly this. They make a call and wait for a response. When you show up, even if it's just to say, "Hey, I'm here, it's okay," you're reinforcing that foundation. You're saying, without words, that the bond is intact, and that smile they give you when you arrive, that smile is pure relief. It's satisfaction. It's the confirmation that the world is a safe place. The second type is boredom crying. This one is more restless, more persistent, and usually comes with little eyes scanning the environment in search of stimulation. The baby isn't suffering, they're bored. And what they want isn't just to be held, they want interaction. They want a human face moving toward them. They want cognitive stimulation. Does it seem demanding? But it's also absolutely consistent with what's happening in a developing baby's brain. The infant brain is, quite literally, building itself. Every new experience, every face they see, every sound they hear, every texture they touch is generating neural connections. Boredom, for a baby, isn't just emotional discomfort. It's a lack of the input the brain needs to grow. So when they call for you in the middle of that boredom, they're asking for development. They're asking for learning. They're asking for the raw material they'll use to build who they will become. There's also social connection crying, which is perhaps the most puzzling of all. Because this one happens when the baby isn't hungry, isn't sleepy, isn't uncomfortable, and technically doesn't need anything. They want you. They've recently discovered that you have an existence separate from theirs, that you leave and come back, and that your absence is something real they can feel, and they don't like it. This is a cognitive milestone called object permanence, and its emergence, around 8 months, is both a sign of extraordinary progress and the origin of the well-known separation anxiety. The baby who cries when you leave the room isn't being difficult. They're showing that they have a mind sophisticated enough to understand that things exist even when they can't see them, and that the absence of the things they love can be felt. That's a lot of emotional information for such a small human to process. Now, I want to speak directly about a fear many parents carry. The idea that responding every time will spoil the baby, create a child who manipulates the adults around them, or result in someone who can't handle frustration. This fear is very common and completely understandable. And I want to be honest with you. It's based on a misunderstanding of how emotional development actually works. When you respond to your baby's cries, especially in the first months and years of life, you're not teaching them that crying is a tool of power. You're teaching them that communication works. You're telling their nervous system that the world responds to their needs, that they're not alone, that there is someone trustworthy nearby. This builds security. And security, paradoxically, is what allows a child to become more independent over time, not less. Babies who grow up with secure, responsive bonds tend to explore more, accept limits more easily, and develop greater tolerance for frustration than babies who learn too early that calling doesn't help because no one comes. Neuroscience is quite clear about this. A baby's stress response system is still being calibrated. When they cry and no one comes for long periods, their body produces cortisol, the stress hormone, in amounts that the developing brain isn't equipped to process properly. Over time, repeated exposure to this kind of unresolved stress can affect how that response system is organized, making the child more reactive, more anxious, and less able to self-regulate. On the other hand, when a caregiver shows up consistently and calmly, the baby's brain learns that stress has an end, that discomfort is temporary, that there is a way out. And this learning is the foundation of emotional regulation, which is perhaps the most important skill a human being can develop throughout life. So when you rush to the room at the sound of your baby's cry and find them smiling, and you smile back, even with a soft "I can't believe it" sigh, know that in that moment, you're doing something far more important than it seems. You're confirming to their nervous system that they can count on you. You're calibrating their internal sense of safety. You're building the foundation on which their entire future emotional life will stand. That baby who pretends to cry isn't manipulating you. They're choosing you, repeatedly, intentionally, within the limits of what they're capable of. They've learned that you come, and they use that learning not to control you, but to feel safe in a world that is still vast, unfamiliar, and sometimes too overwhelming for such a small human. Every time you show up, you're not being fooled. You're being recognized. You are the most important person in the world to someone who still doesn't have the words to say it. And crying, whether from pain, boredom, Loneliness, or simply checking if you're still there, is the only language they have to tell you. You are my safe place. You are my world. You are what I need. Understanding this doesn't make the process any less exhausting, and it's important to be honest about that too. Sleepless nights are still sleepless nights. The constant demands of a baby are still intense, sometimes overwhelming. There's no way to sugarcoat that reality. But there's a huge difference between waking up at 3 in the morning thinking you're being manipulated by a calculating little being, and waking up at 3 in the morning knowing that a tiny emotional scientist is testing whether the bond with you is still there, whether love is still present, whether the world is still a place where they can feel whole. One of these stories drains you. The other, even in the exhaustion, carries a spark of meaning. And in the end, that's what the science of child development offers us. Not magical solutions, not shortcuts to perfect parenting, but a new way of seeing. A way that transforms the unsettling into something revealing, the frustrating into something fascinating, and the crying at 3 in the morning into an invitation to the deepest connection two human beings can have. You're not being fooled. You're being loved in the only way they know how, for now.